Welcome to a NyQuil-infused edition of the Clemson Dubcast, Friday, January 3rd, 2020. Happy New Year, everybody. So many great storylines to this truly sensational national championship matchup between Clemson and LSU. A ton of great content at TigerIllustrated.com this week. Paul Strelo coming out with the all-decade team, TigerIllustrated.com. Man, that is, some of those positions are extremely tough to narrow down, particularly wide receiver and defensive tackle. Thanks to all of our new TigerIllustrated.com subscribers who have joined up in the last couple of weeks. A lot of folks joining the TI community, so greatly appreciate that. Next week, we will be headed to New Orleans for our fourth trip to the national title game since 2015. Just amazing, surreal stuff for sure. Our title sponsor of the Dubcast from way back in the beginning, August of 2018, Parham Smith & Archenhold Law Firm in downtown Greenville. Blake Smith, a good friend of mine, he's been representing plaintiffs in medical negligence and other personal injury cases for 22 years. Brooke Archenhold has been practicing for 17 years now. And Blake recently completed his 10th year as an adjunct pro bono professor at Clemson University, where he teaches sports law. Blake was also featured in a recent Consumer Reports heart surgery risk article. In other words, Blake and everybody else at Parham Smith & Archenhold know what the heck they're doing. Free consultations, 864-990-4581, or online at parhamlaw.com. Our newest podcast sponsor, been with us for a few months now, Blackacre Law Firm, sister law firm of Parham Smith & Archenhold in Greenville. Stuart James is a 1998 Clemson grad, big Clemson fan, just like the Parham Smith & Archenhold family. Blackacre gives you the representation you can depend on when you're on the home stretch, closing on your house, all those documents you're signing, all those technical aspects of it. The last thing you want is for something to go wrong at that point. Blackacre also provides services for wills, powers of attorney, durable, and healthcare. Don't put yourself and your family in a bad situation by not having these important documents. Call today for a consultation, 864-775-5400, or go to their website, blackacrelawfirm.com. That's BLACKACRE lawfirm.com. Okay, got two guests today. Guests for all you grammar Nazis out there. Chris Blair, play-by-play man, voice of the LSU Tigers, has some history in South Carolina and at Clemson. Actually studied under the great Jim Phillips. Pretty interesting stuff there. Also, Jerry Brewer of the Washington Post. He had an excellent column on Trevor Lawrence and Clemson after the Fiesta Bowl. Going to talk with him more about the process of how he zeroed in on that story. Much easier said than done for a national columnist who covers a lot of other stuff to come in and do something like that. Okay, starting with Chris Blair. Here we go. Okay, joined by Chris Blair, play-by-play man, voice of LSU football and basketball. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, football, basketball, and baseball.
And baseball. Do all
three.
Wow, that is... That's quite the schedule you got there. You're preparing right now for a basketball game. Where are you going, I guess, this weekend?
Yeah, we open up SEC play against Tennessee in Knoxville, so tough place to go, but should be a great matchup. And LSU, of course, defending their SEC title from a year ago, so it'll all start this Saturday in Thompson-Boling Arena.
I know how hard it is for me to sort of compartmentalize my thoughts, when you have something as big as what LSU has in football right now, what Clemson has in football. Is it hard for you to sort of switch gears and to transition when you're in the midst of such an amazing and all-consuming story that football has created?
It does become tricky at times. I think the biggest challenge I have is not to say football court and basketball field. So I think if I get that right, most nights and most afternoons, I'm in good shape. But, it has been all-consuming this year just simply from the media spotlight on LSU. And, like many teams who climb to this level and they do it in such a short amount of time under Coach Orgeron, there's so many storylines. And so, preparing for a game and having things to talk about, takes quite a bit to absorb all that information. Most of the time, we only use about 10% of it on the actual game broadcast, but you have to be aware of it. And you have to have some knowledge of it going into it just in case. So It's a pretty consuming week to prepare each week for LSU football. And then when mid-November hits and you get college basketball cranking up again based on what LSU did last year, really over the last 2 years in the rebirth of this program, then that adds double duty because, again, you got to follow the same storylines for the basketball team as well. But, people ask me all the time if it's a grind. It's not a grind. I'm one of the luckiest people in the world. I get to sit courtside or high above the field, watching some of the best amateur student athletes, play, whether that's here at Tiger Stadium or in the Superdome in New Orleans or Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta. You get to see some of the best play. And if you're a fan of the game, any of the games, basketball, football, or baseball, it's hard to beat sitting there courtside, behind home plate, or at the 50-yard line.
Okay, some background here on your story. Actually, a mutual friend of ours, Blake Smith, whom I guess you went to high school with, suggested that I solicit you for an interview, and you have quite a history both in South Carolina and working at Clemson. Can you just enlighten everybody on the steps that you took sort of around here and then getting ultimately to your current position?
Yeah. I spent quite a bit of time in South Carolina. I grew up in Kentucky. Then the parents moved to the upstate of South Carolina when I was in high school. And did go to the same high school as Blake, and knew Blake then, knew his sister well as well. Also went to school there. In fact, my wife, close friends with Blake's family, and we were high school sweethearts, and we're married to this day. So I owe the upstate of South Carolina quite a bit, and grew up in a broadcasting family, and had an opportunity to start in the high school level there in the upstate, called Games for Hillcrest High School, which is my alma mater. Eventually went on to call football games for Greenwood High, just down the road on Highway 25. Did that for about 8 seasons, and got involved with a pretty high-level high school football program in Greenwood, a traditional power. And at that time, Shell Dula was the head coach, and they were playing and winning state titles at that time. And all the while, because of my dad's connection to Clemson and his radio stations carrying Clemson football and basketball and even baseball, I just kept begging the people that handled the network at the time and said, hey, if you need anything, to do anything, carry something, put up tables, whatever the case may be, I'd love to do it. And I guess I bothered them enough that eventually in 1999, just after college, they said they needed some help. So I spent 5 seasons working with the Clemson network, covering football, both home and away. A lot of behind-the-scenes stuff, but it was a valuable education, probably the best education for what I'm doing now, and learning how to, assemble a broadcast, put it together from a technical standpoint, and then being around the great Jim Phillips. I can remember to this day watching everything he did from the time he entered the press box to the time he left. So I had a chance to work with Jim. Don Munson, actually, the voice of Clemson, was the first to give me a chance. He was on the crew then behind the scenes and said we need extra hands. So I owe a lot to Don for getting that opportunity, and loved every second of it. Was there at the end of the Tommy West regime, and there for Coach Tommy Bowden. And then around 2005, had the opportunity to go take all that I had learned at Clemson and put it into practice at Georgia Southern University down in Statesboro, Georgia. And so the education I received working with the guys at Clemson came in handy because at Georgia Southern, I set up the broadcast, prepared the broadcast, sold the advertising, and called the games, which, again, was a thrill for me. But I have a lot of fond memories and a lot of really close friends that are still Clemson fans, Clemson alum. I hear from them all the time. I've heard from a bunch of them this past week, wondering if I accidentally had tickets falling out of my pocket for the game coming up. But was around Clemson a lot, and again, I think a lot of Clemson and really the help they gave me into doing what I do today. And I remind Don Munson on a pretty regular basis that he gave me a shot putting together cables and setting up broadcast booths years ago that served me very well today.
And just curious, you mentioned that you learned a lot just from watching the late Jim Phillips from the moment that he arrived to the press box. Can you maybe specifically share some of the more important things that you observed during that time, his routine?
Absolutely. I watched very carefully how he, what he brought to the booth. I think that was key. What did a guy like Jim Phillips, who was legendary, what did he have when he walked in there that he felt he needed to do a broadcast? And, I would watch as he would get his briefcase out and plop it up there on the table and get out his notes, get the proper pens that he would need, any binoculars he may need in the event of trying to verify something down there on the field. And then the way he worked with, at the time, Rodney Williams was in the booth. Rodney also spent some time on the sideline when I was there, the great Clemson quarterback. And Sack Bagley was there as his spotter. And, I just watched how he interacted with them, because what a lot of people may not realize is that I think people think we have all these numbers and all these names and all these stats in our head, which would be great if we actually could do that. But it's a nice little choreographed dance that happens in these booths for both radio and television. There's a team of people that put it together, but the best ones, and Jim Phillips was certainly one of the best, makes it sound like he's got it all right under his control, and he made it sound so smooth. So I would watch how he interacted with his spotter, with his stats, how he, set up the color analyst from time to time, knowing the answer. And I thought that's what was great about Jim. He knew the answer, but he gave Rodney a chance, or Mike Epley, who also worked in the booth at that time, a chance to kind of expound. Jim was the guy that said, hey, for those of us who didn't play at this level in college football, this is what Clemson or LSU just did. And because you, Mike Epley, and you, Rodney Williams, or in my case at LSU, Doug Morrow and Gordy Rush, who work with me, explain to all of us, the layman, why this is happening, why it's been successful or why it's not. And I thought Jim was very good at being able to do that. I'll never forget the first game I worked in the booth with Jim. I had been doing high school football, and doing high school football, you basically get a roster of maybe, 80 kids, 0 through number 90 or number 95, and you have that in front of you, and you call the game. There wasn't a lot of 2 deeps or 3 deeps being handed out by high school coaches at that time. It's a little different now, but back then you kind of had to guess who the starting lineup would be. And my dad told me a long time ago, the worst thing you can do is call the number. Make sure you call the name. And when you call the name, make sure you call the name correctly, because you're going to upset a mom, a grandma, an aunt, or whoever. So doing that in high school was tough, because they played a lot of guys, and you just would see the play happen, then you'd have to quickly scan down that long roster, find the number, and instead of saying the catch was made by number 80, you needed to say that the catch was made by Tommy Davis, or whatever the case may be. And so the first time I did the Clemson game, I'm in there, and I realized that Jim has got this nice little dance he does where he follows the ball, he calls the play, he looks to his right, Sack Bagley tells him who had the ball and who made the tackle, he looks to his left, and Harold would tell him how many yards he got. But he did it in such a way that when you listen to it, and I was sitting in the booth watching him, but when you listen to it, he did it so smoothly that he relays the information, and it seems to flow so well. And that's what I find is the most difficult thing. You're given information from a lot of different sources. We've got people talking in my ear the entire game. And if you've ever tried to talk while somebody's talking directly into your ear, sometimes you got to get used to that and still be able to make it sound like you knew who caught the ball, you knew how many yards they got, you knew who made the tackle. And that's because of the teamwork. And I thought Jim did that as smoothly as anybody I've ever seen. And it's one of the things I strive to do each and every day. So, again, I've got a lot of heroes in this business that I grew up listening to. And to have the privilege of working with one of those heroes and mentors has been invaluable to me.
So you spent 10 years as Georgia Southern's radio voice before. In 2015, you became the voice of LSU. Georgia Southern is big in its own way, in that sort of bubble, of course, because football is very important to the fans down in Statesboro. But LSU, a whole different animal, of course. Just curious, how did you go about auditioning for that job at LSU?
Well, I usually would call Clemson once a year. Nobody would take my call, and I am traveling with Georgia Southern. I'm kidding, by the way. I traveled with Georgia Southern. We were actually in Monroe, Louisiana, covering Georgia Southern and Louisiana Monroe in basketball. And this would have been mid to late February of 2015. And I got a phone call from a friend of mine, Wes Durham, who I know Clemson fans know. He's now on the ACC network every day with Mark Packer, but also was the longtime voice of Georgia Tech and is still the longtime voice of the Atlanta Falcons. And Wes says to me, "Did you hear Jim Hawthorne, the voice at the Jim Phillips, if it were for LSU, is going to retire at the end of the season?" I said, "No, I'm actually in Louisiana, but I'm in North Louisiana, and I didn't hear that." And Wes said, "You really ought to look at that job." And two reasons. One, it's LSU. And two, in Louisiana, and when it comes to LSU, radio is still a big deal. And he said, for somebody who really wants to stick with radio and not move over to TV, this would be where you want to be. And I said, well, okay, I got to get back to Georgia, and then I'll do something about it. So I got back on Monday, put together everything I could put together that I thought was the best representation of what I was doing at Georgia Southern, and then emailed that off in late February, and then pardon the pun, radio silence for I guess 3 or 4 months, and got a phone call just before Memorial Day in 2015 asking if I would come to Baton Rouge for 2 days, and I of course said yeah, tell me when, and I'll be there. And spent 2 days here in Baton Rouge, fell in love with it. And in fact, coming back to the airport on that second day, I called my wife back in Georgia, and I said, I was hoping they would offer me the job today. That's not going to be the case, but just know that if they offer, I'm coming to Baton Rouge. And she was excited as well. And we had a chance during the summer, so that was the end of May, and it was kind of quiet, and we had a vacation planned, and we changed our minds and decided that we would come to Baton Rouge for 3 or 4 days, which we did. And then on June 19th or June 20th, I think it was, of that year, we got a phone call from then athletic director Joe Oliva, who said, we would like for you to follow suit as the voice of the LSU Fighting Tigers. And I said, again, tell me when and where. And as it worked out, Jim was doing his last season in 2015, and they allowed me to stay at Georgia Southern and do what would be my last season there. And Georgia Southern was nice enough to let me continue on, which they didn't have to do. And Georgia Southern, lo and behold, went and won their first bowl game as an FBS team after making the transition for 2 seasons. So I ended on a good note at Georgia Southern and came to Baton Rouge on December 7th, 2015. And it's hard to believe it's been 4 years already.
What was it that made you fall in love with the place so instantly during those few days there specifically?
Well, I was already used to the heat and humidity being down in southeast Georgia, so that wasn't an issue. A lot of people told me, boy, I tell you what, you wait till July or August in Baton Rouge. Well, they obviously haven't been in Savannah, Georgia at that same time of the year. It's about the same. So the weather I was certainly accustomed to. And having grown up in the cold mountains of Kentucky, I like things to be flat. I got enough of the mountains growing up. I like to be close to the water. I like to be outdoors. I like to fish. So, it's Louisiana's the sportsman's paradise. So from that standpoint, that checked all the boxes. But, being here on campus and going through the facilities and meeting with the staffs and the teams and the coaches, it felt like what I had always wanted to do, is what I'd always dreamed of being since I was really a young kid, listening to Kaywood Ledford at the University of Kentucky and Bob Fulton and at South Carolina, Jim Phillips, as I mentioned, at Clemson, Woody Durham at North Carolina, Gene Deckerhoff at Florida State. All those guys, I always thought that was what I wanted to do, is represent a major institution on the athletic side. And LSU, to me, is one of the most recognized brands in all of college sports. So, just being here on the campus and not knowing a lot about LSU, prior to that point, it won me over in about 24 hours. And then it was a matter of whether or not I'd get the opportunity. And once that opportunity was there, I grabbed it on with both hands.
Obviously, in the run-up to this tremendously compelling national championship, the obvious arguments, which Tigers are better, which is the the Superior, Death Valley, all that stuff. I'm not sure that I really get into those arguments because both of these places, and as you probably know, are so distinct and so great in their own ways that I almost feel like you have to celebrate both of them as opposed to picking one or the other. Does that make sense to you? And you're probably one of the best people to answer that question. How do you sort of reflect on that and sort of the similarities and then a lot of the significant differences?
Well, Larry, I feel the same way about it that you do, and I think that's to your point because I've been involved with both and I've seen both. And get that over here just like I'm sure you get it in South Carolina on which one is the Death Valley and which one is the best program and which one are the Tigers. I fall in the same spot you do. I think that both stories are pretty impressive. And I've mentioned a lot this season. I've done a lot of interviews all over the country, and people talk about what a turnaround Coach O has done. In 3 seasons basically since taking over as the interim coach in 2016. And a lot of times I'll mention that there's a lot of similarities to what Coach O has done here, at least in the results. They've gone about it different ways, don't get me wrong. But the results and the structure and the foundation that was built, there's a lot of similarities to what Coach Sweeney has done at Clemson. And if you think back to it, I think when both coaches were named the interim coach, it was kind of okay, well, all right, there's some continuity there because they were on the staffs. And then it came time to pick a permanent head coach. And I think Clemson fans would be lying if some of them, not a majority, but some of them, a good portion of them, thought that they didn't go out and find another already known head coach at another program that had proven success, as a head coach. And that was the same thing here at LSU. And then you get down after a year or 2 or 3 in Coach O's case, and you look at the organization and the structure and foundation that are built. And again, a lot of similarities. You got a position coach who was kind of the rah-rah guy, always being able to motivate his players, get the most out of their players, and basically players will run through walls for it. And when you talk to players, and I've talked to a bunch, those are the type of guys you want to play for. They've hired a great staff, assembled a great staff around them. Some staff have moved on to bigger and better opportunities for themselves, but because of the organization and the foundation, you simply just plug and play. And obviously Dabo's been able to do that at Clemson. Ed O's done that in just 3 years here at LSU. And there's a lot of similarities there. I mean, you look at the facilities that both enjoy. You look at the stories both can tell on the recruiting trail and when players come to visit and when they go into their homes on recruiting trips. There's a lot of similarities there. And it's no surprise to me that at the end of this season, we're looking at LSU and Clemson playing for a national title. So I don't know where the argument ends or how you finish the debate on which one is this and that and who's the best Tigers and all that. It comes down to who wins the game on the 13th of January. They will be the champions for the 2019 season. And then, again, going back to what I said with the foundation and the systems and the structure that are built both in the upstate of South Carolina and here in South Louisiana, I don't think it's something that's going to go away. Obviously, Clemson has proven that. And frankly, I think with what Coach O and his staff have done, making hay with the success they've had, the exposure they've had, the accolades they've accomplished, it's not a one-hit wonder. There's too much built underneath to allow it to go away quickly. So I think you're going to be talking about Clemson and LSU, along with some other great programs, year in and year out for the foreseeable future.
Over the year we've been doing the Dubcast, we've developed a great relationship with the folks over at the Abernathy Boutique Hotel. In addition to being a great meeting spot for our interviews we conduct with local personalities, it's also a fantastic place to stay. The Abernathy is rolling out a loyalty savings program for 2019. After your third stay, you'll automatically be rewarded with an exclusive offer. It can be applied to future reservations for the remainder of the year. 15% off rooms, 15% off food and beverage at Taps Bar and Cafe. Learn more at theabernathy.com. If you you run a business that conducts credit card transactions with customers, you got to learn about Tandem Payment. Credit Card Processing Company has offices throughout the Southeast, but the one in Greenville in the upstate, headed up by a 2005 Clemson grad. Tandem's technology allows business owners to offset their credit card processing costs by applying a small customer service charge to each sale they make. Tandem has an A-plus rating with the Better Business Bureau and was awarded the Better Business Integrity Award in 2013. Check them out at tandempayment.com.
I've been to LSU one time for a game. I believe it was 2003 when Saban was there, and Georgia came to town, and I was covering the Bulldogs for the Augusta Chronicle at the time, and it was a 3:30 game, so it wasn't the typical night game, but it still had that night game atmosphere because it was a huge game. Georgia had won the SEC the year before, I believe. And the two things that stuck out to me that were really distinct about LSU was, number one, the smells that hit you in the car when you're driving up. Not the typical tailgating smells. This is like a haze of gumbo, jambalaya, and bourbon. Like you can just feel it. And then the students were there, like, God, it had to have been 2.5 hours before the game in full force, like maybe 10,000 of them filling up the student section. It seems to me, and I want to hear your thoughts on the differences between the two Death Valleys. Clemson, great atmosphere, but maybe more buttoned up, more of a family atmosphere, whereas LSU is just a full-on party. Is that pretty close to accurate?
I would think you're right. I mean, you mentioned the term family, and I want to say this and be very clear, or I will be in trouble. One of the things I've gotten a lot from friends of mine who haven't been to an LSU game or they've heard about an LSU home game, they talk about being intimidated and scared, and there's nothing farther from the truth. And I've seen it firsthand because I've had friends who've come over. I had a lot of my Georgia friends came to the Georgia game here at Death Valley last season. And they all were kind of like, hey, where do we need to be? What do I need to wear? I said, just come as you want to come. I said, you don't need to bring anything because you're not going to go hungry. You're not going to go thirsty. I can guarantee you that. And the hospitality will be top notch. And lo and behold, every time I've told somebody that, they've come away going, you know what? This place really surprised me based on what I had heard. When you're here, because everybody enjoys the rivalry of college football. We wouldn't be here if we all didn't. But the hospitality is top notch. But it is a full-on party from the time the sun comes up till, Jimmy Buffett says there's a fine line between Saturday night and Sunday morning. Well, nobody knows that better than LSU fans who come to a game here at Tiger Stadium. So I think that's probably the biggest difference. Is it's a little bit. It's like a 24-hour Mardi Gras every home game. People show up. They put elaborate tailgates on, just like they do at Clemson. But it's more of a party atmosphere. You put 102,000 people inside the stadium. There's probably 150, 175,000 around the immediate area, some of which had no intention of ever going in to begin with. They're just here to soak up the atmosphere and the party. And it's something else. I mean, I've been to some great venues. I've had the pleasure of working some great venues, and everybody across the country, in my opinion, from the Power 5 to the G5, have their own unique traditions and things that are just pertinent to that particular locale. And I'll say it, and it may not please everybody, but the truth is I've been a lot of places, and there's some great tailgates everywhere, but there's none like LSU on a Saturday. It's just I couldn't compare it to any other place that I have been. So I think it is different from Clemson. But again, I think both have outstanding game day offerings that is obvious why they have such a rabid fan base.
Shifting back to the skepticism that greeted the decision to permanently make Coach O the head coach, a couple of pivotal junctures stick out to me just from the outside looking in. One, the hiring of Matt Canada as the main play caller on offense. I thought it was a great hire initially, and then as it really kind of wasn't working out, it was viewed by me and others on the outside as Orgeron just being stubborn and not being ready to truly modernize the offense. But as it turns out, gets rid of Canada. He doesn't like all the shifts and all that. It just seems like Canada didn't have the preferred style that Orgeron wanted in the modernization or the planned modernization of that offense. But then after they lost at home to Alabama 29-0, I remember Orgeron saying, you know what, we just got to get better players. And he sort of boiled it down to a talent issue. But now, I think I'm getting this right, and correct me if I'm wrong, he looks back and reveals now that was when he realized he needed to change the offensive scheme and go modern, and that set in motion the hiring of Joe Brady, who's been so instrumental in making that offense just a force of nature. Am I hitting the key points right? And what are your recollections of those moments and perhaps others that were crucial in building things to what they are now?
No, I think you hit some of the cliff notes. I mean, you'd have to be in on the ground, I think, early on to realize how this has all come about. And just the other day, I went back and watched his press conference when he was named permanent head coach at the end of the 2016 season. And I can go back and play line for line what he said he wanted to see and what his goals were as head coach of the Fighting Tigers. And I can then line that up with what we have seen here in 2019. I'll never forget, he talked about wanting to be able to run the ball when they wanted to run the ball and run the ball when they had to run the ball. He wanted to be able to throw the ball when they wanted to throw the ball as well as when they had to throw the ball. In other words, he wanted to be able to do both and do both very efficiently and proficiently. And that's, again, 3 years ago, he's talking about this is what he wanted. He knew when he got the interim job that you couldn't do what LSU had done offensively for over a decade. And number one, please the fans. But number two, and maybe more importantly, his reference to getting better players was that if you were going to line up in the SEC, more specifically the SEC West, and simply go in the I formation, run between the tackles, and try to smack people around, you had to be head and shoulders bigger and more talented than the teams you were going to face every week, and more specifically Alabama. And that drove LSU fans crazy because in every big meeting under Coach Miles and even under Coach O, when they played Alabama, it was, we're going to line up and we're going to try to beat you. Well, LSU could do that 9 or 10 times a year, but they couldn't do it against a team that was evenly matched in talent and size. So that's what Coach O was alluding to after that tough loss. But all along, he wanted to modernize the offense. I think the Matt Canada situation comes down to two guys who really just didn't see eye to eye on much of anything. And once that kind of, reared its ugly head, then I think there was a trust issue involved, and neither was willing to give up a little bit. And I think it came down to, it just wasn't a good fit within the coaching staff. But again, I think it was an attempt by Coach O, who again, Canada had a tremendous year, as Clemson fans know, as the offensive coordinator at Pitt. Hey, this may be something new that we can install. I just don't think it was the offense so much that he wasn't impressed with. It was just, they just didn't get along. And Coach O's a pretty upfront, pretty transparent guy, and he will tell you, and it's a joy to work with him because there's really no hidden agenda. I mean, he tells you exactly what they want to do, how they're going to go about doing it. And I just think that was not a good fit. And he really trusts Steve Ensminger. And I think after the loss last year at Alabama, it came down to, all right, guys, we've got to modernize this. And, Steve, I need your help. And Steve said, let's go find somebody to bring us some new principles, some new philosophy. I'll take a back seat. I got no ego here. I just want LSU to win. You got to remember, Ensminger was a star quarterback at LSU, and he'd been on the staff for a long time. This guy bleeds purple and gold. It's not about Steve Ensminger. It's about LSU. And he's one of the guys that truly puts school and team first before himself. And they looked around, had done some camps with New Orleans. They had been introduced to Joe Brady. And I think he impressed both Steve and Ed. And they said, hey, let's bring this guy on. And Steve was the first guy to say, absolutely, let's do it. And the marriage of them working together this year has been fun to watch. And it's one of the more interesting ones in not just college football, but in football in general. the way they orchestrate things in a given game. And I got privy to that during the preseason scrimmages. Their booth at Tiger Stadium is next to ours, and we were watching the scrimmages, and we could see them next door. And it was fun to watch how they were doing it together. You know, Joe sometimes is watching the defense looking 3 to 4 to 5 plays in advance. Steve is calling the plays, and then as each play comes, Joe's kind of throwing this out. You know, they're doing this, they're trying to take away this, and that affects and influences, you know, the call that Steve makes. And they have it down to really a science, and it's been something to watch. The numbers certainly speak for themselves, but I think you had the gist of the timeline there for Coach O. But again, I've told everybody from Kirk Herbstreit to you know, radio announcers all over the country, this is what we're seeing this year is what Coach O said he was going to deliver in that press conference back at the end of 2016. So for those who were there, this is not a big surprise. Are we surprised it got here as soon? Maybe a little bit. Did we anticipate the numbers and what Joe Burrow would do as far as throwing the football this year? I don't think anybody could have guessed that. But the success they're having, I don't think is a huge surprise for those of us that were around there when this thing got started.
The hiring of Brady is obviously a masterstroke given the success that has followed, but it looks even more brilliant when you consider, I mean, this was a lower-level assistant with the Saints. It wasn't like this was some obvious wonder kid. I mean, 5 years ago, he was a linebackers coach at William & Mary. He was a GA at Penn State in 15 and 16. How, you just think it was just a meshing of the same concepts and the relationships that they had developed between the two staffs?
Yeah, I think they liked the principles, and you know, I think they got word from some of the staff that had worked with Joe that he was a guy that would come up with something and see something and go, hey, I think we can use this. And then the more experienced and seasoned coaches would go, okay, let's try to meld that into what we do. But they liked his ideas, and they liked the way he thought, and they liked the way he watched and followed the game. And I think that got to, you know, that information got to Ed and eventually to Steve. And it just seemed to be a good fit. Again, just going back to that same word, that he could kind of come in and bring that new life, new ideas, innovation to a seasoned play caller. I mean, Steve Ensminger is a great play caller. And for him, again, I can't say enough to come back and go, hey, look, if somebody's got some better ideas, we can put it together in practice, install it into our offensive plan, and then have both of us working as the game goes along. When it's time to try this, when it's trying to offset what the defense is doing, I'm all for it. And, you know, nobody was happier for Joe Brady winning the Assistants Award, the Broyles Award this year, than Steve Ensminger. And, of course, Joe Brady, during his acceptance speech, said this award should have Steve Ensminger's name on it. And I think there's some truth to that. But, yeah, that's the better story, is how they plucked this guy out of obscurity. I was visiting with Coach Brady in Atlanta prior to the Georgia game on Friday at the team hotel, and I said, you know, I don't know how old you are, Coach, but did you play for William & Mary when Georgia Southern went up there and wore them out at home in the FCS playoffs? And he goes, oh, boy, did I. So that was a miserable game. We got our ass beat by Georgia Southern. And I said, wow, you were playing on that team. He goes, yeah, I was a wideout on that team. And we couldn't do anything against them, and they ran all over us. And to think now he's the darling of college football. And, you know, that game to me seems like yesterday. I guess it was 2011, 2012, maybe.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And he was playing for William & Mary, and then was on the staff, as you mentioned. Got hooked up at Penn State as an underling. Worked with Joe Moorhead, who's now the head coach at Mississippi State. And then ended up with the Saints and Sean Payton. And I think all of those stops along the way, you know, gave him a real boost and an understanding of the game, and the fact that he's on the cutting edge of what new offenses are doing just made a great fit when you've got a grizzly guy like Steve Ensminger, who's seen just about everything for the past 30 years as a coach, and then a guy who's got some vision onto what's coming up tomorrow in the game. And you put those two together, and both of them check their egos at the door and just want to win. You know, after every victory this season, Coach Joe Brady tweets out 1-0. That's what he puts. And I think he learned some of that from Steve Ensminger.
After LSU went into Tuscaloosa and hung 46 on the Crimson Tide, there were some good stories, sort of the context of how things came to that. And I think I read somewhere, I forgot where Orgeron and the staff, as far back as spring practice, realized what they had and how terrifying it was going to be, and they had full confidence that they were going to finally knock off Alabama. When did you get a sense, your first sense that, okay, this is a big deal, and this is sort of a transformative, transcendent move with the offense that was going to allow Burrow to become a Heisman candidate and for that offense to be basically unstoppable?
Well, there were two moments. One was the 3rd and 17 play against Texas. In that second half, LSU, of course, jumped on Texas early in that game. And you're on the road in Austin. Everybody's fired up because Texas is back. So we were told. And, in the past, LSU would have a lead, and they would say, how do we take the air out of the football and keep the football out of the hands of the Texas offense? And that just wasn't what LSU did. They came out and kept doing what they'd done to start the game, which was move fast. And on that 3rd and 17 play, you're thinking to yourself, with the time and the score, you might, try to get something safe, get in a setup there where you possibly can punt on 4th down and pin them back and rely on your defense to close this game out. And they draw up a beautifully called play that took some extraordinary action on the behalf of Clyde Edwards-Helaire in pass protection to give Joe just an extra second or two. And Joe then still had to slide to his left, and almost a jump pass hit Jefferson. But when you watch that route, Jefferson started on the right side of the field, went up, then curled, and then crossed. And Texas, actually, they noticed that they had the two safeties playing deep, and they knew there was a cushion. So they threw the ball right to the first down sticks, about a 17-yard pass. Problem is, when you get Jefferson in space, just like Jamar Chase or Terrace Marshall, you better bring them down quick, and they didn't. It was one stiff arm, and JJ was gone. That's when I realized this team's not playing with a lead. They're playing to win, and they took the kill shot against Texas, and that was all she wrote. The second part was about 15 seconds after the game ended. Kirk Herbstreit runs in our booth. We were next door to ESPN. He slaps Doug Morrow on the shoulder and say, "You guys better buckle up. This is going to be a hell of a ride." And that was week number 2 of the season. And again, just the whole atmosphere and kind of the feeling you had around the program and the confidence these guys have. And it starts with Joe Burrow. I mean, I've said it a million times. Joe is one of those guys that walks that line between confidence and cockiness, and he never wavers one way or the other. He's mentioned it several times. It's not cockiness when the facts back it up. And he said in July during SEC Media Days, get ready. LSU's going to score 40, 50, 60 points a game. And everybody laughed. Even LSU fans were a little bit like, whoa, come on, Joe. Let's pump the brakes there a little bit. But he had seen what they'd done in spring ball. He had seen the individual workouts. I could see during preseason camp that nobody dropped passes. I mean, if the pass was in the vicinity where an arm or a hand could get it, it was caught. There were no drop balls over there at the practice facility, which stood out to me. But I think the Texas game is when I realized, they could have easily lost this game. And, I'm not so sure that teams from last year and the year before or 5 years ago wouldn't have lost that game. And that was a different feeling. So I kind of felt the same way Ed did, being around the team all season and then preparing to go to Tuscaloosa. It felt like this was the year. And, I've seen everybody so far through 14 games throw everything in the world defensively. At this offensive line and Joe Burrow. I've seen, Auburn kind of tried the I formation defense that we call it with 3 down linemen and basically 8 in coverage. We've seen exotic blitzes from Texas. We've seen it from Auburn. We saw it from Nick Saban in Alabama. I kind of felt the same way he did. It was a matter of LSU going out and doing what they do. If they do what they do more times than not, I feel like they'll be okay.
LSU fans, based on the results and where the game is being played, could not be more confident, it seems, just from the outside looking in. Where do you stand on this matchup, and how do you see things shaking out? I'm sure you still got plenty of studying to do, but at this early juncture, how do you view it?
Well, it's funny for me because all the talk leading up to the final rankings in the Final Four, my thought was all along, just get in. And, I'll be honest with you, I'm going to brag on our coach a little bit. That's basically the mentality Coach O took. He was asked for 4 weeks there, should you be number one? Are you number three or number two? And he said, I don't care. I don't care. We'll play anybody, anywhere, anytime. I want to be in the Final Four because I think we deserve to be in the Final Four, but it doesn't matter to me if we're the number one seed. You got to go win 2 games. And that was kind of his philosophy. And, I think that should be the philosophy. As it turned out, they were the number one seed. I think it's because of just absolutely thrashing Georgia in Atlanta, a team that everybody said this is the greatest defense, one of the best defenses all year. LSU's not faced a defense like this, and they beat them 37-10, and the game really wasn't even that close. I think Clemson is a fantastic team. I think they're an elite team filled with elite players on both sides of the ball. I never felt like that Clemson wasn't getting respected as one of the top teams. I think the question for a lot of people, at least from the national perspective, and you got to remember, a lot of these national guys take in a game or two for a particular team, and then they watch from afar. And they obviously aren't at practice every day. They obviously aren't around the team very much. And I don't think they were saying Clemson wasn't one of the top 4 teams. I think they were saying, is this Clemson team as good as they have been? Because, frankly, we just don't know based on who they have played. And so all along, I thought Clemson's going to be there. And whether or not they're the number 1 team, number 4 team, number 3, I knew they were going to be there. They're just too good. They've got offensive weapons all over the place with Higgins, Lawrence, of course, who showed his heart and character in the win over Ohio State. We all knew what Travis Etienne could do when he left the state to play at Clemson. That was a great get for the Tigers, and he's proved it so far. And, they can score with multiple weapons. Defensively, they're probably as good as any defense LSU's faced all season. And again, I'm talking about elite defenses like Auburn, Florida, and Alabama may not be what they have been, but Alabama's a good defense, and Georgia. So I think it's going to be a great matchup. I think it's great for college football. I saw a lot of the national bobbleheads talk about nobody's going to watch this game outside of the South. Well, I have a hard time buying it. I don't know what the ratings will be, but I think there's plenty of great storylines. I think there's similarities between the two coaches. I think both teams have played with chips on their shoulders this season, because of their coaches. I think the coaches stand up for their team because they know they're talented and the work they put in. So I to sit here and say you're overconfident that LSU's playing Clemson and that they're playing in New Orleans, I know for a fact Clemson fans travel as good as anybody, and I've been around Clemson before these glory days. And I know they were living off a national championship from decades ago, and they kept waiting and waiting and waiting for something to bring them back to the top, and I've been impressed. They haven't taken it for granted. And they're still excited, and they're still at fever pitch when their team's playing for a national title, even though they've been in this conversation and have taken the title home already. I think that long drought between their title with Danny Ford and getting it with Dabo Swinney, I think, has kept this fan base still engaged and still excited. So I know they're going to travel to New Orleans. It's a great place to go. It's a great place to take a family and prepare for a couple of days before a ball game. I think it's going to be a great game. Again, there's a lot of unknowns for me for Clemson, just like there is for a lot of people, just because we don't get to see them play that much. I've saw maybe 2 or 3 games this season, and I can't say the opponent they were playing was anything to write home about. So it's hard for me to gauge that. I just know the numbers they put up. I can watch the eye test with how these guys run, how they catch the ball, how Trevor Lawrence throws the ball, how accurate he is, and really I think has improved his game since midseason. And I think that's when he took some of the criticism early on in the year, but I can't see how you could lob any criticism at this point over the last 6 weeks or so. So, maybe there are a confident bunch, but I'd say there's a lot of Clemson fans that are pretty confident that they'll come down here, and they've beaten the Alabamas of the world, so why are they going to be afraid of LSU? So I just think it's going to be a great game. Look forward to it.
People actually said that nobody outside of the South is going to watch this game. That's just crazy.
Yeah. It's some of those are media buddies in the Big 12 and the Big 10. They tend to spout that off when one of their teams aren't in it. Although I think the Big 10 and Big 12 ought to be worried about their bowl victories at this point. But again, I think it's just that national mentality. The Pac-12 hasn't been relevant for forever, and again, you've got two of the best teams without argument. In my opinion, I think the two best teams in the country playing, and you get the argument on expanding playoffs. I think this year's Final Four, in my opinion, basically says there's no need to expand the playoffs. The difference in LSU and Oklahoma was night and day. It looked like a holiday backyard football game in the first half. 7 passing touchdowns, 49-14. And what's missed in that game, Larry, by the way, is that by design, LSU took their foot off the gas in the third quarter by design to not allow Jalen Hurts to get any kind of flow or any kind of momentum. I mean, they had the ball one possession in the third quarter. And Joe Burrow and company said, look, we're just going to run the ball and throw, some quick screens and some hitches and slants just to pick up first downs. We're going to get 6 yards here, 7 yards here, and just keep them off the field. So the possessions were deliberately slowed down by LSU in the second half, because I really thought they were going to score 100 at the end of the second quarter.
Well, it's going to be an absolute thrill. I can't wait. Should be just an absolute spectacle down in the Superdome, and just one of the all-time great college football games against two great teams, just filled with talent. So looking forward to it. I'll introduce myself to you down there, and just really appreciate you sharing your valuable time with us, Chris.
No problem, Larry. I appreciate it, man. And again, congratulations to Clemson on another great season, but really a great number of seasons. And as I mentioned from the outset, I still got a lot of good friends that are Clemson supporters. And as I mentioned, I've heard from a bunch of them this week. Some of them looking for tickets, some of them just trash talking, but that's all right either way. And I'm glad Blake hooked us up. Blake's a good fella, man.
Yes, he is. He and his business are the title sponsor of the podcast, so I really appreciate him with the suggestion. It was a great one.
Well, if things go our way on the 13th, I'm going to hand deliver him a nice purple and gold shirt that he can wear proudly.
That's great. Hey, safe travels, Chris.
All right, thanks, Larry. See you then.
Quick word about Uptown Realty, LLC, headed up by Patrick Enzer, former sports writer who decided to get into the real estate game. Uptown Realty, locally owned and operated out of Sumter, but they serve the Eastern Midlands and PD area with the buying and selling of homes, commercial properties, and land. They also offer affordable new housing in the mid-130,000s from a local custom builder. Patrick is the sole owner and broker in charge. Grew up in Anderson, going to Clemson games, been in Sumter for 15 years, loyal Tiger Illustrated subscriber, loyal Dubcast listener. Website is uptownrealtysc.com. Big supporter of the Clemson Dubcast is Harris Flooring America, based in Anderson, South Carolina. Harris Flooring has been instrumental in a lot of the facilities transformation you've seen on Clemson's campus lately. From the Allen Reeves Center to the McFadden Building to Memorial Stadium to the Neary Center. Family owned and operated since 1947. The owner, Scott Junkins, big Clemson guy. Harris Flooring is just as good inside the home and the residential realm as they are with the larger scale commercial stuff. Give them a call, 864-642-6183, or online at flooringamerica-anderson.com. Okay, now we're going to go to Jerry Brewer of the Washington Post. He had no background with Clemson or Ohio State, just sort of parachuted in and spent some time in Scottsdale learning about the teams, and then he wrote a fantastic column, which I will link on the TigerIllustrated.com message board introducing this podcast. It's a great read, and so now we're going to talk to him more about his process on how he's able to sort of zero in on something like that. Okay, here we go.
Okay, joined by Jerry Brewer of the Washington Post. Jerry, thank you for joining us, man.
Thanks for having me, man.
Okay, so I stumbled on your column from the Fiesta Bowl, and I was struck. Just sort of, I have a casual knowledge of what you do. You know, you normally write about the NFL, NBA. More of a generalist. But man, you just really nailed the column, I thought, with identifying how Trevor Lawrence sort of elevated above everyone else. And showed his grit and toughness to help Clemson win that game. So just want to hear more about that and your thoughts on what you saw that night.
Yeah, it's interesting for me, Larry, because college football, if you did the pie chart on my percentages of columns, college football is very low. Yet, if you want to ask me, as a general fan, if I'm just enjoying a game, what I would prefer to watch, college football would be very high on that list. So, being someone who born in Tennessee, grew up in Kentucky, the fact that, Kentucky's in the SEC and Louisville's in the ACC now. So I watch a lot of SEC and ACC football just for my own enjoyment. So it was a real treat to get to cover the Fiesta Bowl. And maybe there were some thoughts, some feelings, some impressions that I had that maybe just kind of all came out into that column. And it just so happened that I thought Trevor Lawrence was a perfect subject for me because he's someone that I'm just highly intrigued about, how he burst on the scene last year as a freshman and how that team really peaked at the right time and blew out Alabama. And we looked at how young that team was and we just thought, oh my goodness, they're going to be a dynasty and everything's going to be easy for them. And even though they ran through the competition, in the quote unquote regular season, there were some moments where people were kind of playing that game in which they made Lawrence a victim of his own success. And I was like, there's an ability for him to elevate that I expect to see in this Ohio State game. And I expected it to be a struggle. I wasn't surprised that Ohio State jumped out on them just because Clemson didn't get the opportunity to play a team like Ohio State. And Ohio State, I mean, quite honestly, the college football playoff got it right this year. I mean, LSU, Clemson and Ohio State's right there. And if things break another way, they not only could be playing for the national championship, but they very well could beat an LSU. So I figured the game was going to kind of go that way. And I wanted to see Clemson's championship medal tested. And so when they got behind, I was like, they're not out of it because they're limited on the field goals, and let's see what they got. And I was really impressed by the way they responded in that game.
So just some background here on your process. You live in Seattle,
yes.
Where you previously worked as a columnist for the Seattle Times. And you're all over the place. Like the day after the game, you were in Seattle for the 49ers Seahawks game, correct?
Yes. Yeah. Went back for the 49ers Seahawks game. My attention right now is heavily on the NFL playoffs. So, I jump around, there was a chance that I was going to write about, the passing of David Stern and his impact on the NBA. There's no telling what I could get into next week. So it's a true journalist job. I mean, there are very few people who are generalists anymore. And in order to do it at a high level, you really have to be on it. But it's something that I enjoy doing as opposed to just going deep on one subject.
Okay, so did you fly in to Phoenix the day of the game, the day before?
I flew in a little bit early. It was interesting. We thought that game was such a big game that we put two people on it. So Chuck Culpepper, who's a brilliant writer, a journalist in his own right, was there, and he handled the week. And I said, I could have either gotten there the day before or whatever, but I saw how the schedule broke. And I saw that the family needed a little bit of a break. So we came to Arizona on Christmas Eve. And I prepared for that game almost like an announcer would, trying to get ready. I did a lot of, I went to all the media sessions, did a lot of listening, a lot more listening than I would normally if I were preparing a story. Normally you've got your eye on one thing and you ask your questions and you're really purposeful about it. I did a lot more roaming and really trying to get to know and get a feel for both programs because, once again, I can't remember the last time I saw a Clemson football game that I covered. It had been a number of years since I covered an Ohio State game as well. Believe it or not, whenever they would come to Maryland, when I was in D.C., we would just skip that game because Ohio State was always going to win it, 55-16 or whatever. So it had been a little while on both ends, but so I just kind of prepared for it that way, and I think I was ready to write whatever happened.
Yeah.
And we always kind of have some kind of feel for how the game is going to go. But I really felt good about 7 or 8 different scenarios. So that way on Saturday night, I could just, even though we're on a deadline situation, I can sit back and enjoy the game and have a real good sense that no matter what goes on, I'd be capable of writing to it in a way that is, I like the intimacy of journalism, and I don't want to just be the guy who comes in and has a sweeping take of like I'm seeing it with my own eyes for the first time. I call it, and I love him as an announcer, but I call it the Charles Barkley way of doing things. It's like, it's so funny. You watch, like, especially when he does college basketball during the NCAA tournament, a team doesn't play well offensively in the first half. Oh, they're a terrible offensive team. Oh, well, guess what, Charles? They led the nation in scoring, So I think it's really important. You're writing it for this broad readership, but you also want the Clemson or the Ohio State fan, the diehard fan, to pick it up and feel like that they are reading about their team. And that mattered a whole lot to me.
It's fascinating to think about the dichotomy of the sort of process between somebody like you who comes in on Christmas Eve and who takes it upon himself to learn as much as he can about both teams and to come up with all these storylines, compared to, say, like me, somebody who's around these teams every day. By the time you get to the 3 or 4 days before the game and the press conferences, there's not a whole lot we are going to learn. It's other than maybe, I think Justin Fields' knee being not really as healthy as they wanted it to be was the only real news item that I could think of. But you, on the other hand, you're reporting, you're informing yourself as much as you can about these teams. So it's interesting and kind of refreshing to hear that those press conferences that a lot of us just sort of roll our eyes at are actually useful to people who are trying to take their job seriously, that generalist kind of approach.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's important to me not just to ask the things that I want to know, but to sit back and to catch the vibe of what people who cover it every day, how they feel about it, the kind of their sensibilities and have a real respect for that. Sometimes a lot of national writers come in and they just kind of blow up the spot and it's all about them.
Yeah.
And I think, that's fine. And a lot of people, want to get that, originality or kind of, their own take. But it's important for me, on top of my own take, to understand what the general vibe is. And so sometimes it's as simple as like, just asking the reporter next to you. Is Dabo for real? Like, is this the way he always is? Is he authentic to you? Are there any times that you think he's just kind of putting on? What is he really like? Is he more like, say, Bobby Bowden, or is he more like, say, Roy Williams? And trying to get a feel for those kinds of things, and just little things. Every little thing kind of matters in the tone of your story. And as I've gotten older, so much about the way I write is about tone, as opposed to, how much I flaunt my vocabulary or my access or anecdotes or all of that. I want to make sure that the tone is correct, because there's just there's an integrity to doing it that way. that really matters to me. And I've been on that other coin, other side of the coin. I remember as a columnist in Seattle during the Seahawks Super Bowl run, you would be doing a fantastic job of covering the team. Somebody would parachute in and they would just kind of like put all the pieces together, and everyone would talk about, oh, what a fantastic piece that was. But when you really look back, like the beat writer or the columnist or whoever did that same story, but in like 10 parts, and 10 little pieces throughout the year. And too often, I think we over-respect the person who is able to come in, fly down from 30,000 feet, and just tell a complete story versus the people who have been staring at it from 5 feet, who have been giving you the play-by-play in a sophisticated, classy manner, but don't have the opportunity to step back and see the whole field and tell it in one piece. So I really respect the people who grind it out day to day. And I've tried to adjust my approach in a sense to making sure that the journalism that I provide represents and celebrates and appreciates the way that they do it, which is the way I think ultimately it's supposed to be done.
So before the game starts, after all the conversations and listening that you had conducted over the previous few days, what did you learn about Clemson and Dabo that you didn't already know?
Well, I mean, I think a lot of it was well, number one, you learn it's not just about the talent. I mean, they coach their butts off, and they're an incredibly balanced team on both sides. Of emphasis, you know, it's not like they care more about putting 45 on you than they do about defending you, than they do about having good special teams. So I appreciated that. I was surprised. You know, I didn't get to watch them play, but it struck me, and maybe it's something that I didn't pay as much attention to because you're worried about, you know, the All-Americans, the Etiennes, the Simpsons, even the Lawrences, you know, all their marquee players. And you know that they've got all these top 5 recruiting classes or whatever. But the depth on the roster and the respect for the depth, you know, it was interesting to me to hear Dabo talk about these guys who aren't even playing, that he expects to be as good, if not better, than some of the All-Americans who are about to be drafted in the 2020 draft. And it really struck me what a delicate balance they have, making sure that those guys are happy and making sure that too many of them don't transfer. I was also just fascinated with their culture, you know, a culture as the decade was ending there. You're able to really reflect upon everything that they had accomplished and how they kind of went from the little program that almost could to the little program that did to the big program that still looks at itself as a little program. All of those things, and you're able to really kind of appreciate all the work that has gone into it. And it just, you know, and it helps you kind of differentiate them. Like they are Ohio State, but they're not Ohio State. They are Alabama, but they're not Alabama. Even they are LSU, but they aren't LSU. And, you know, it was really fascinating to me to kind of get a feel for the human side of their dominance and how it came together, and just what is going to sustain it moving forward. And then, you know, like anyone, we're fascinated with how much of that coaching staff they've been able to keep together for so long. And so just being able to ask a few questions here and there when the coaches were available, that was interesting as well. And just with all the star power, I'm really impressed that they have this unified vision and sense of mission. And normally, you know, you see a program that we weren't getting these elite recruits. Now we're getting them, and then something kind of changes about the overall vibe. They can't coach them the same way. The guys don't believe in the same things. It becomes more about me. it's pretty amazing that, even though it's a football team and you have to be all for one, it's pretty amazing that they've been able to keep the same spirit of what got them there. That was really impressive to me.
So the game starts, and you've said you have a number of possible things to write about. I don't know what your standard word count is, maybe 800 or 900 words, or maybe 1,000?
Yeah, right around 1,000.
Yeah. Is there a pressure there to get it right, like to find the right story and to do it and to meet deadline? What's your deadline?
Yeah, I mean, it's we kind of have. I kind of wrote on and off deadline. So there was an early deadline to kind of cram it in, and then there was a deadline that could go as late as 3 a.m. or something, where I could kind of write the story in full. And so you sort of saw it in full, and I would probably consider it a bit of a mess before then. But yeah, there's a tremendous amount of pressure. I mean, you're talking about a team that's the winner's going to play in the national title game. You haven't really covered them. The event is bigger than life, and so it's a little harder to get at stuff. You don't want it to just be a mess of content. You want to have some story, and it needs to be bigger than Clemson won in my case, because my audience doesn't go that deep with Clemson. So it needs to speak to some greater truth about college football. And that's where it gets a little bit tricky is, we kind of consider that elevating the story. How do you make it about more than just who won the game? And that's where it gets really complicated. And that's where it seems like everything significant that happens, J.K. Dobbins, has 2 runs of more than 60 yards in the first half. And you're sitting there and even doing a little bit of Googling and researching and looking at your notes and everything. And you're just like, well, what could I write about J.K. Dobbins with elevation? What could I write about Justin Fields with elevation? What could I write about, the Clemson defense with elevation? What could I write about ultimately Trevor Lawrence or Etienne or whoever? That's what gets really tough on deadline, because you can put so much pressure on yourself that you forget what it's all about. Yeah. And, fortunately you just, the general formula is you keep it simple. If you can write about the star, you write about the star. And for the purist in us, we don't always like that, especially in a football game, because there's so many things that have to come together for a team to win. But in this case, you got to know your audience. My audience knows who Trevor Lawrence is. And, that they will be more invested in the journey of Trevor Lawrence, perhaps than any other thing that I could write. And, so once that storyline presents itself, it becomes pretty easy to know that you got to go all in.
But just as an example of how microscopic the line is between writing on one thing and the other, if Olave doesn't fall down, and if Justin Fields hits him for a touchdown, or if it's incomplete and Ohio State scores anyway, and Clemson doesn't have a miraculous drive for a field goal, you're probably writing about Justin Fields, right?
Yeah, you're probably writing about Justin Fields. The other thing that kind of scared me about that game, the calls and the replays, and it's just like, well, how big of a deal do you make of it? In general, I'm thinking, in college football, there's, 80, 90 plays on both sides. You got to give the officials some kind of leeway. You don't want to make it about them. So, that was a tough part. If it sort of ends messy, and that's the dominant storyline, a la the Saints last year against the Rams, I had to cover that one, and that was really tough to figure out how to tell a story in which you're doing more than just complaining and griping about the officiating. Fortunately, when a college sophomore who damn near got knocked out of the game goes 94 yards in 4 plays to win it, that makes it that much easier for you to say, there was this messiness to the game, and it was important. It was a factor, but really pay attention to the resolve of this young man and this team.
Here's how you address that particular part of it. Ohio State was left to lament several officiating calls, most significantly a scoop-and-score touchdown overturned upon replay in the third quarter. But the resilience of Lawrence and Clemson factored into the Buckeyes' frustration as well. They had a chance to put the game out of reach early, but they settled for field goals on too many drives. Clemson was bound to come back, and then you transition into a quote from Dabo saying, "It's just our DNA." I thought you handled that part perfectly, honestly.
Thank you. And I think either way, I would have handled it that way if it were Ohio State in that situation, and Clemson had been the team that was wrong. I think I would have handled it that way if I were writing for the Columbus Dispatch about it, quite honestly. Mm-hmm. And maybe Ohio State fans wouldn't have been very happy with me in the hometown paper, kind of handling the bad call situation that way. But again, it's a game of incredible successes, but it's also a game of a lot of failures. And there's a lot of factors in that failure. Some of the other team and the fact that they can stop you or they can put pressure on you to contribute to your mistakes factor in. And quite honestly, I mean, the officials can't be perfect either. And, as great as Lawrence was in that game, I could point to 2 or 3 moments when he could have been better. Knowing him better could probably point to 6 or 7. But we have to deal with overall impressions and not just worry about minute things or instances. Once again, when we're talking about a game that each team runs 85, 90 plays typically in college football.
A great friend of the Clemson Dubcast and winner of the Clemson Area Chamber of Commerce Business of the Year Award, Founders Federal Credit Union. If you've been to a sporting event in Clemson, you've probably heard about Founders already. They are the official credit union partner of the Clemson Tigers, and all Clemson faculty, staff, and students are eligible for membership, as well as IPTAY members. Matt Gross is a proud Clemson alum and the vice president for the Clemson market for Founders Federal Credit Union. Membership at Founders has many benefits: great rates on loans and savings products, advice on investments and insurance products, and even a Clemson debit card available for any Founders member with a checking account. Founders Federal Credit Union is federally insured by the NCUA. If you're in Clemson, stop by and see Matt and his staff at 680 Old Greenville Highway, Suite 300, right next to the Walmart Neighborhood Market.
This game had so many things to unpack. I never get writer's block, and after all the interviews and things were done, I went straight to the media shuttle. It was on the way back to the media hotel in the van, and I'm sitting there with a blank screen for probably 20 minutes. Just where do you start with something like that? Just because it was almost like 2 different games and so many pivotal junctures and then questionable calls and a lot of stuff. Just a smorgasbord of possible angles, but you chose the little pop pass, the great play call there at the perfect time. And I'm assuming you're walking down to the press conference. Dabo and Trevor had some great interplay during the press conference about, he was throwing it in the ground and during practice, and Trevor saying, I didn't like that play. You obviously don't know you're going to get that kind of color when you're walking down to the press conference. Are you sitting there as they're talking about that? Are you thinking, okay, that's it? That's what I'm starting my column with?
Yes. I specifically, in my instance as a columnist, kind of what your point of view, what your point is going to be. It's all about in the post game. It's all about how am I going to illustrate this, and then you do have to verify whether what you felt was the right take or not. Sometimes you'd had the wrong impression, and reporting shows it's not actually that, it's this. But in that case, it was pretty clear, and it was just a matter of adding color to it, really getting the kind of some intimacy to what Clemson is all about, what Lawrence is all about. And that was absolutely perfect. You know, if it were more of a dry press conference, I don't know which way necessarily I go. Maybe I focus on the hit in which he got the stinger. And there was something about, you know, I remember watching that and watching him come off the field. And once he got off the field and he was on the sidelines and he flipped that hair, I was like, okay, he's gonna be good. So I even thought about maybe starting there with another one of his dramatic. This was a defiant hair flip as opposed to a dramatic. You know, I need a Head and Shoulders commercial hair flip.
Oh, that's great. So another part of this, you just mentioned that you're sitting there watching, you know, the aftermath of that hit. It's so tempting for a lot of sports media people to bury their heads in their computer on Twitter into the conversation during a game. And a lot of times people don't bother to pay attention and to be disciplined in watching what's in front of them. How disciplined do you have to be, you know, to notice something like that?
Yeah, I'm allowed to be a little more disciplined because of what my job is. You know, I'm not the beat writer, or I'm not the national football writer who feels like this is my moment and I got to give everybody every little detail on every medium possible, whether it be Twitter, Instagram, live blogging on a site, whatever. So I'm able to be more selective, and I understand I'm fortunate in that manner. I would say, though, you know, I live tweet games less than I ever have before. And some people will fire off 200 tweets in a game.
Yeah.
And I'm just more like, my thing is, when I have something to say, I don't need to tell you what happened. You already know what happened. You're paying attention. And if you're not paying attention, you're not looking at me to tell you what's happening in the game. You know, that's more for you, Larry, or whoever. So my thing is, like, you know, make sure I've got something to say or something to add, or just something to express. And so for me, that makes it fair. You know, it's very rare in a football game that I would tweet more than 4 or 5 times in a quarter if I'm at a game. I have no problem just disappearing from Twitter altogether. And that allows me the chance to pay attention and do the old school things in reporting. You know, people only tell you so much of the truth when you ask them a direct question. You got to be able to see some things and have some insights, and then be able to ask questions based on what you see to get greater insight. And too often, you know, we're just kind of trapped in our workload now. And that's rough. You know, I mean, I can't sit here and tell anybody else, oh, you should only tweet 4 times a quarter or even 4 times a game, because that's not going to necessarily work for them and what their job is and what their, you know, following wants. But I would encourage people, if there's something that you feel like the general audience already knows, you don't need to add on and write to it. You know, just display your unique insights, and free yourself up enough to be able to watch the sideline when that star player gets hurt. You know, if somebody has to go all the way back to the locker room, you know, take out the binoculars and follow them the entire way, see what's going on. Because there's so much stuff. Like the game, I got a motto: the game is not the story. The game is a platform to tell a story. And you got to have, your eyes need to be wide open for you to find out what the game is actually telling you.
And even for the beat writing type, it doesn't make sense to me to tweet 250 times a game. Like, you know, while you're watching important sort of developments with Trevor on the sideline, the average beat writer, he's too busy tweeting, okay, Trevor Lawrence is hurt. Like, is there somebody like in Japan who isn't watching the game, who is relying on just the tweet? I've never had anyone. I tweet maybe 3 or 4 times a game, honestly. And I've never had anybody say, "Hey, man, why don't you tweet more during the game or post more on the message board?" Anything, my job is to find things. I think our jobs are to find things that people watching on TV can't see. And
to put things in the proper context. I mean, instead of it being, we are all going to have those, oh, wow, like let's say something clever because Trevor Lawrence, pulled a Lamar Jackson on that run and showed some amazing things. But in addition to that, it's better if you can just add some insight. Maybe you knew something about that play, or maybe there was some play earlier this season that reminded you of, or a play earlier this season in which maybe he could have gone for 67 yards, but he hit the hole wrong, or maybe early in his career he didn't know how to run as well, and it kind of he wouldn't have been able to have the vision to see that was possible. Those kinds of things to help enrich your readership. And so Twitter is not the same as a story, but I do think we can still put story standards together in order to enrich the audience, because we have to be careful. I mean, I think overexposure ruins many people, and we are definitely overexposed in these platforms, and we need to be thoughtful about the content we put, and make sure that it's kind of reflective of what our readership demands of us.
The story of this season for Clemson is Trevor Lawrence going from somebody last year who got by just sort of on his wondrous physical gifts, and sort of, he responded to his brilliance with sort of a shrug of the shoulders, kind of like Michael Jordan when he was hitting all those threes in the finals against Portland, like almost, I'm just sorry I'm this good, to the point where in the Fiesta Bowl he had to show another side of himself, that grit, that cutthroat competitor, sort of transcendent quality that he had to rise above everyone else. And I thought you captured that perfectly when you said that when you have a 25-0 collegiate record as a starter, to go with a massive 6'6" frame, quick feet, and a rocket arm, people tend to focus on your most obvious blessings. But as Lawrence showed in helping Clemson rally from a 16-0 deficit, he isn't just some anointed quarterback unwilling to fight. He has the grit to go with the physical gifts. And while he made 3 or 4 plays in this game that most NFL superstars can't, his leadership and composure meant just as much to the victory. I thought you nailed it right there.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It means a lot to somebody who watches him regularly. And that, again, that was kind of the prep work that I was doing. You got that vibe that, maybe just kind of listening to people talk and the questions they ask and the way he responded to things. It just kind of gave me more clarity about that than the stats showed, because I think just flatly, if you look at it, you say, oh, well, he threw a few interceptions early, but by the end of the year, he was 34 touchdowns, 8 interceptions, yards up, rushing yards up, all of it. What's the problem? What was the big deal early in the season? But you did get that sense of how things were a little different for him. And he did kind of realize that it's hard to be the dude on top.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people thought, oh, well, he's going to win the Heisman this year, and he's going to win it running away. And then all of a sudden, Joe Burrow emerges and kind of runs away with things. And Justin Fields was really good, and Tua was Tua before his injury, and kind of so on and so forth in college football. And Clemson, which is, on one hand, Davo's absolutely right. On one hand, it kind of annoys you that he's able to play the underdog card, but they just kind of, for a team that was, the defending national champions, going for a repeat, dominant all year, never lost, they did start to kind of float under the radar as much as a team that was 2, 3, 4, 5 in the country consistently could. And, you know, and there was this different vibe about, like, you know, good not being good enough for the quarterback.
Yeah.
And you're wondering, like, well, what do you learn in that situation? Do you turn defiant? Or do you wind up responding and learning from it and realizing that you aren't perfect? Maybe you don't deserve some of the criticism that was over the top, but some of the things that some people were saying was legitimate.
Yeah, it's like, you know, did Dabo take some of that stuff too far? Maybe. Did he pull it out of thin air? Hell no.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Jerry, once again, it is a really hard job for a generalist like you to parachute in and tell a story in such a deft way. And so I hope that this conversation sort of enlightened the average non-journalist person on the accomplishment of what you did. Are you going to be in New Orleans?
I'm not going to be in New Orleans. I mean, this is how my life goes. There was sort of this thought back and forth, like, should I go to New Orleans or should I stay west and deal with, you know, whether it was the Niners or the Seahawks and their run. And we decided that I should stay west. Probably got my eye on the Seahawks and 49ers part 3. Mm-hmm. And so that's what I'm going to kind of focus on. I hate to miss it, having watched Clemson, Ohio State. That was a great game. As we kind of know, like in the college football playoff, you know, one great game kind of begets another. And I'm always kind of leery of the team that just, like, blows someone out and everyone kind of thinking that they're just going to run away with it versus the team that really has to scrape and grind and battle and get one. And I'm really interested to see this game. You know, Clemson's going to have to be nails on the back end.
Yeah.
I mean, Ohio State can just challenge you in so many different ways with their passing game, and their passing game is so clever and it's so different from anything we've ever seen from an LSU team. So they're going to have to get some pressure up front, and they're going to have to be nails on the back end. But something tells me that you know, this Clemson team has been sitting on their best game for quite a while, and that they are capable of elevating to another level. I don't think they're going to be very happy. I don't think they're very happy looking at the tape of the Ohio State game. And I think they're going to play their best game against LSU, and we'll see if that's enough. I mean, if LSU's an all-time team and an all-time offense and they get beat, that's one thing. But it would shock me if Clemson doesn't play well in the game.
You bring up a good point, because Dabo, even as happy as he was not happy about that first half. Said he would have given it a B-. I think the whole game. But anyway, and you know he's tearing into people behind closed doors this week trying to address it. So that's a great point about Clemson maybe sitting on its best game after an uneven game in the semifinal. Jerry Brewer, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. We don't even know each other, so you've been very gracious in giving me your time, and safe travels to you, and enjoy those kids that I hear in the background.
All right, sounds good. Thank you, man.
Okay, awesome stuff from both Chris Blair and Jerry Brewer. Thanks to Blake Smith of Parham Smith & Archenhold for coming through in the clutch with a great idea of interviewing his friend Chris Blair. Thanks to everybody out there for listening. We'll be back next week. Everybody have a safe and fun weekend. Cheers.